So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Erica Manuel. I am the CEO and Executive Director of the Institute for Local Government, and I am so excited to have you all on the line with us today for our second session in the series on cultural intelligence. And if you're just joining us, feel free to go ahead and get acclimated, grab your coffee, but we do ask that you try and kind of maintain all the technology solutions we've learned during the pandemic, including some of the things on the next slide, which we'll talk a little bit about just our overview and housekeeping for you all. Please make sure that you are on mute throughout most of this training, except for when we're in the group discussion. Feel free to use that chat button, type your questions and comments into the chat box at any time during our session. And if you are in session one with us, you know that Jacques is great about answering questions as they come through, making sure that the commentary rolls with the lessons he's teaching as well. And then if you are not familiar with the Zoom screen, there's a little cheat sheet on the screen for you right now that shows you where that chat button is, and that shows you how to do the other thing, which we're going to ask you to do, which is update your screen name. Make sure that your first name, last name, and organization are listed as well, so that when we can connect with you and communicate with you via chat, or even when we assign you to breakout groups, that we know who you are and where you are. The last thing is related to this recording. You should have gotten a notification that we are recording this session, and we are going to record the main session. We will not be recording the breakout groups, but we do always like to have that little disclaimer that does share that we are recording today's session, so that you can go back to it as you need to, and also so that we can share this information with those that weren't able to get into today's session, since it was, again, sold out. Next slide, please. Now that the housekeeping is out of the way, we just want to give you a quick overview of the Institute for Local Government and our leading local webinar series. And most of you know us because you've signed up for this session. Some of you might not, though, because we did find that a lot of people, especially city managers and elected officials, are referring us and this webinar series to their colleagues. And if you are new to ILG, we are so excited to see you and meet you and hopefully get to know you on this session. But we'd love to tell you just a little bit about this program. Next slide, please. So we are nonprofit, we are nonpartisan, and we are here to help local governments. We are the education and training affiliate of the League of California Cities, CSAC, and the CSDA organization. Together, we support over 2,500 local agencies, that's cities, counties, and special districts. And our mission is really to help you with those challenging topics, those really sticky issues. We like to help you figure out how to effectively implement policies on the ground. It's not enough to have great policy at the state level or at the federal level. It's really about how it comes down to the ground level, the community level. And that's why we love local government and why we're here to support and help local governments. Next slide. So many of you might know this and might feel this in your bones, like so many of us do, but in a recent survey of local government leaders, we found that over 64% of them reported that they are struggling with understanding concepts like implicit bias, talking about equity, and navigating difficult conversations. And that was really part of what drove us to bring this series to ILG and partner with Impact Foundry and Jacques Whitfield with CPSHR on this effort. We are so excited to acknowledge that, we are now in a moment in time when people are willing and interested in talking about equity. We understand that it's an issue and an opportunity for local government. And so as the Institute for Local Government, we really want to bring together leaders to figure out how we can address the issue, how we can work together, how we can collaborate, how we can learn from one another, but with the lens of local government, which is a little bit different than the lens you might experience from other angles, right? The topics are the same, the issues are the same, but the way that we approach it is a little different because we have things like the Brown Act. We have some restrictions that are limited by some of the structures that local government is based on. So how do we build learning communities, have technical assistance, have trainings and resources with local government leaders in mind? That's what ILG is trying to help with. We're working with partners to do that. And this is just a part of this process, which will be multi-step to bring resources to you. Next slide. So this last webinar, if you were on it, was about Cultural Intelligence 101. It was really the foundation of what this series is about and what the conversations can be about. And really thinking about cultural intelligence holistically, moving beyond political correctness and really thinking about what is cultural intelligence? How can you have real understanding with the people in your community? How can you have real understanding with the people and the colleagues in your workplace? How do you learn differently? How to relate to and work effectively with different groups of people across cultures to really think about equity differently and to build trust, not only internally, but externally as well. And so we built the foundation in session one. We'll certainly do a little bit of a recap for you if you missed session one. And we're moving into session two today, which is about the language. It's about the words that we're going to speak and the words that you might be hearing and making sure that you're all on the same page in terms of definitions and appropriateness and approach. So I am excited, if you go to the next slide, to bring our trainer to the screen. And you've maybe heard his voice already this morning. And if you were in session one, you heard it a lot. He's so great. Jacques Whitfield is here with us. And he's one of the few people who looks exactly like his photo. But it's so great to be on the Zoom screen with Jacques again to teach us a little bit more about this cultural intelligence. There's a lot on the screen. Read it. Just know he's incredibly qualified and has been doing this for a very long time. I'm going to turn it over to my esteemed colleague and friend, Jacques Whitfield.
Thank you so much, Erica, and good morning, everyone. I am excited to be back with you on behalf of our partners at Impact Foundry, on behalf of CPSHR. Thank you so much for joining us today as we continue our journey of equity. You know, I love the words that, I love all the words that Erica offered into the space, and especially grounding us that equity is both an issue and an opportunity. And so we get to explore this opportunity and explore the power of language and how language can be used to facilitate engagement, enhance engagement, to maximize engagement. Because for those of you who joined us for session one, we realized that diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, this journey that we're on, is really all about maximum engagement with ourselves and with our teams, maximum engagement with our local government organizations, maximum engagement with our communities. So this session is going to be all about the language of DEI, building a living glossary. And again, you know the ground rules. You folks are rock stars. So I'm just going to thank you. I'm going to thank you for being present. I'm going to thank you for being actively engaged and participating. And we recognize that engagement looks different to different people. So some of you may have to live what we say in the transformational space as being in the both and. You may be multitasking. Thank you for your engagement. And for so many of you have your screens on. You are physically engaged, you are engaged in every sense of the word. And so we thank you for that. Again, don't panic if there are technical difficulties. We've got really smart people on both sides of us who will be working diligently to get us connected as quickly as possible. This is a conversation about cultural intelligence. Cultural intelligence, as we learned from our foundational course, is based in emotional intelligence. And so we invite you to give yourselves permission to expand your worldview. We invite you to give yourselves permission to actively seek what is that next level of elevation. And as always, we want you to learn and we want you to have fun doing it. So here's our roadmap that will be going on today. We're going to have an icebreaker activity that we're going to do on the chat. We'll do a brief recap of cultural intelligence, and then we'll jump right into the language of DEI. Now, halfway through, we're going to take a 5-minute stretch break. We're going to practice some self-care, move away from our screens, hydrate, take care of the personal needs we get to hydrate. Let's be reflective and mindful of the concepts that we've covered. And let's be reflective about what we're going to cover in the remaining time that we have together. We do have at least one breakout activity for you today, and it's going to be halfway around that mid-range where we're going to break you into groups and allow you to have some prompted discussion. Again, there's always an opportunity for questions and feedback. We do provide a comprehensive reading list for you, and we're excited to have you on this journey. This is a safe space. it's really important as we designed these training offerings when we were speaking with Erica, that we really wanted to presence safety, emotional safety, because we know that conversations around equity, around diversity, inclusion, and belonging, they can be difficult to a lot of humans. They can be difficult because we, in part, may not have the language to adequately explain and express our lived experience. We're going to be covering that today. So after today, you will definitely have language. Most folks are, because of everything that's been in the media and social media, there have been folks who have been afraid to really be transparent, to really be vulnerable and share their lived experience for fear that they're going to be caught in some, in some never-ending debate. So that's not what this is. This is a virtual learning space where we powerfully acknowledge the lived experience of each and every human that is represented here. Here is not about right or wrong, not about good or bad, not about any of those judgment concepts, but this is a recognition that each of us is on this journey, that each of us is at different levels of the journey, and that's okay. And this is not a cookie cutter approach where we're saying this worked in XYZ city or XYZ municipality or XYZ agency, so we're giving you this cookie cutter approach. No, not at all. This is a journey in which you get to set your own benchmarks, you get to set your own pace. Yes, we're going to give you some universal tools, but the way that you apply them gets to be unique and special to your local government organization. So our invitation for today, there are multiple ways to experience today. We're going to talk about 2 ways to possible experience today. We have 2 images of 2 beautiful creatures before us on the screen. We have the bald eagle and we have the ostrich. Let's take a look at the ostrich. Now here we see the ostrich doing what ostriches have been stereotypically known to do, and that's bury its head in the sand. And again, no judgment, right? It probably is very comfortable. It's very safe down there in the warm, snuggly sand. And we certainly know humans like this, that the way they approach difficulty, the way they approach unknown situations is to be armored up. Let's create that maximum safety, right? Let's not place ourselves in uncomfortable situations. We know that see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. And certainly that is a possible way to experience today. Now, there's also the invitation of the bald eagle. Now, the eagle has been known to be commonly called the king of the birds because the eagle can fly higher than any other bird species on the planet. And one thing about the eagle that is pretty unique is that the eagle has the ability to navigate through every sort of aerial obstacle it may encounter as it's flying. So it can fly over wind, over turbulence, over rain, over storms, over all the things. It can fly so high, fly so high, fly so high as to overcome all of those obstacles. And what it sees is a clear, unobstructed view and vision of its destination. And so that is our invitation to you. Take on the ways of being of the eagle. Yes, we may encounter some turbulence, but if we keep soaring and keep soaring and keep flying, we will reach, in the words of Southwest Airlines, that safe, comfortable cruising altitude where we can safely navigate towards our destination. Here is our grounding theme for today about the power of words. I want you to take a minute and just take that in. The power of words. Don't ever diminish the power of words. Words move hearts and hearts move limbs. We're going to be very present to the power of words today. Now, I remember my first grade elementary school teacher, Sister Maria Goretti, and we used to sing a little nursery rhyme. I'm sure many of you baby boomers may have sung this same rhyme. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. And with all due respect to dear Sister Maria Goretti of St. Francis de Sales Catholic School, where I attended many, many moons ago, this was not my lived experience, because I've recovered from every physical injury, bruise, cut, broken bone, what have you, but I still remember every hurtful word that was ever spoken to me and spoken about me. And so as we go through our curriculum today, as we go through this training, let's be present that we have the ability to create maximum connection and engagement with our words. And we also have the ability to create division. And so what are we choosing? So our icebreaker activity, this is called the Word Nerd Game. So for the next 60 seconds, I want each of you to tap into what is the way of being that you're feeling right now. As we're about to embark on our second module of the Cultural Intelligence Unit series. Are we excited? Are we hopeful? Are we anxious? Are we inquisitive? Whatever those words are, whatever you're feeling, we want you to light up that chat and share with us exactly what is your way of being as you're approaching today. So, and already you folks are responding: curious, sponge, interested, inquisitive, open. A lot of curiosity, excited, love it, love it, love it. Love it, committed, love that. Love those, love that energy, love that engagement in the chat. Cautious, yes, attentive. Excited and ready. Wonderful, wonderful. Give a couple more seconds. Curious, curious, curious. Curious is the word of the day, I do believe. Wonderful. Thank you so much for that engagement. Let's continue, shall we? So let's do a brief recap of cultural intelligence. We learned in our foundational training that cultural intelligence is not a 2020 phenomenon, right? That there have been thought leaders in the organizational development space, in the HR management space, who for decades have been researching, addressing the question of how do we build high-performing organizations? Recognizing that high-performing organizations are made up of high-performing teams. And those high-performing teams are made up of individual team members who have different perspectives, different lived experiences, different ways of communicating, different generations, different genders, different physical framings and shells and abilities and all the things, right? And so we learned that these thought leaders in the HR management space and the organizational development space have created this framework of cultural intelligence. And the seminal article on cultural intelligence was actually published in the Harvard Business Review way back in October of 2004. So this is a way of being, this is a framework in which high-performing organizations have been attuned to for decades. And so now, as the events of 2020 and the aftermath have really given the entire world a wake-up call that we get to do engagement differently. This is why we powerfully offer cultural intelligence as a solution to maintaining and to cultivating this maximum engagement. And so what we learned that cultural intelligence is having the capacity to work to relate to and work effectively with different groups of people across different cultures. And we learned in that foundational course that the term, the nomenclature culture or cultural is not really speaking to ethnicity or national origin, but we're really looking at that term through the anthropological sense, and we're talking about human beings, groupings of people. So how does one group of people effectively connect, effectively communicate, effectively collaborate with another group of people, whether they are similar to or dissimilar to that group? And we also learned that cultural intelligence articulates core competencies and skill sets that organizations have the ability to cultivate and develop, both among its team members and among its leadership teams through the staff development process for the purpose of promoting greater equity, greater diversity, and greater inclusion within those organizations. Now, we learned in that foundational session that cultural intelligence comes out of emotional intelligence. And if there are 5 pillars of emotional intelligence, then there are 5 pillars of cultural intelligence. And we see they're virtually identical, right? So that self-awareness, one and the same. The self-management, also called the co-regulation piece in the cultural intelligence framework. This is the capacity of holding neutral space. That whole concept of not having judgment, to accurately assessing and evaluating any given cultural situation before we decide what is the best answer. Social awareness or situational awareness, again, one and the same. And the last 2 pillars of relationship skills and responsible decision-making in the emotional intelligence framework. In the cultural intelligence framework, this is that concept of having that expansive or growth mindset, which we call acknowledgement, and all about, can I agree with my fellow colleagues without judgment, that we're calling alignment. And the responsible decision-making piece in the cultural intelligence framework, we're calling that having multiple perspectives, multiple worldviews. There is no default answer key in the universe. That default answer key does not exist. It is not in English. It is not written from the American point of view or American perspective. The American perspective is just one of many beautiful perspectives on the planet. And then we learned about 2 powerful factors that have impacted each and every one of us as humans, that also none of us had anything to do with. And those 2 factors are birth and circumstance. None of us chose when we would be born. None of us chose what family we'd be born into. None of us chose what continent we'd be born into. No one chose our native tongue, what was the spiritual practice of the families we'd be born into. None of us even chose our own name. Now, that may have been possible once we were adults and living, that we may have changed our name, but isn't it interesting that all of these critically important factors about us that make us who we are, we had absolutely nothing to do with it. And this point is a great point of connection and alignment, because as humans, being a meaning-making species, as humans have created all sorts of meanings and histories and mythologies and spiritual practices and narratives about why we are who we are, we know, anthropologically speaking, there are 2 answers, and that is birth and circumstances. And so this point of connection allows us to, well, it reminds me of that saying, you can't see the picture when you're in the frame. And so this awareness allows us to step out of the human frame and see all our points of commonality and our points of connection and our points of alignment. And then we learned in that foundational section, that foundational training, that the closed mindset of agreement does not serve us as humans. And so that next level of elevation was to embrace this expansive or growth mindset, which we call acknowledgement, which is an essential element of mastering cultural intelligence. And acknowledgement leads to alignment, which purely and simply is, can I agree with my colleagues without judgment? And so that is our foundation. And now as we move to our curriculum today, we're going to be exploring the concept of common language and common understanding. So we're going to go through the DEI alphabet, and we're going to begin with D, diversity. Now, the post-2020, post-pandemic, post-George Floyd, post-everything definition of diversity is the sum total of humanity. Diversity is inclusive of every single human on the planet. Diversity goes far beyond protected status. In California, there are some 17, 18 protected statuses. Protected status is a subset of diversity, but is not the entire universe of diversity. So diversity is inclusive of all people, white people, people of color, is inclusive of all genders, is inclusive of all generations, all ways of being, all generations. It is the sum total of who we are. So it's having a range of people with various racial, educational, socioeconomic, cultural backgrounds, lifestyles, lived experiences, and interests. Diversity is both static, meaning there are things that I cannot change, characteristics that I cannot change, and it's dynamic, meaning that there are things that change all the time. And let's recognize that the meaning of diversity has evolved and expanded over the last 60 years. And many of us have a meaning of diversity that aligns to when we enter the workforce, and that's really interesting. But today, let's be clear that diversity is inclusive of every single person on the planet. It is not an othering conversation. And let's remember, through the standpoint of engagement, how can I connect to something that I don't see myself represented in? So this is a major takeaway. So now we get to be word nerds. And when we're talking about improving or increasing diversity within our organizations, we actually get to be factually specific and say what we mean. How do we want to increase diversity? Are we talking about generational diversity? Are we talking about ethnic diversity? Are we talking about gender diversity? Diversity of abilities? Are we talking about diversity of educational experiences, diversity of outlook? Let's recognize no two humans are the same, and that there are multiple diversity characteristics. And so let's be clear, let's be intentional. We don't have to tiptoe through the tulips. Diversity isn't a bad word. It is what it is, it's an outcome. And so let's present the fact that diversity is inclusive of every single person on the planet. And if we want to be specific, we get to be specific. And that is the definition of diversity. Now, as we move to equity, we in the United States, and those of us who have been acculturated and who've grown up in the United States, are familiar with the concepts of equality, and that is treating everyone the same. The concept in which all are treated the same. Equity is different, it's nuanced. And there's a difference between equity and equality, both are important. So equity really looks at the removal of barriers to create maximum outcome for people. Where equality is focused on treating folks the same, the outcomes are what the outcomes are. Equity is really outcome driven. So say, for example, when I was a 7th grade math teacher, I had one goal, and that was to make sure that all my students in 7th grade made it to the 8th grade in 1 year. And I had students with all sorts of levels and abilities. I had some students who were so gifted in math, they could teach the class. And I let them teach the class on certain occasions, right? Because they were that good. I had some students who, as they were grasping some math concepts, just needed some occasional support. So if we were like learning concepts of fractions or multiplication and division of fractions, they may need some homework sheets. They may need to come by after school for some homework help. Then I had students who needed more regular and consistent support. And they actually got after school tutoring, Tuesdays and Thursdays from 3 to 5 in their homes, right? Now, in that situation, in that scenario of my 7th grade math class, did I treat all students the same? Of course not. Did all students have the same outcome? Absolutely. The outcome was, I want you to make it successfully to the 8th grade in 1 year. One more example about equity and equality, and it's a fun example, and I invite you to take it with you. So I love to cook. I know that Erica loves to cook. So Erica and I are going to throw a fabulous brunch for all of you. Now, through the lens of equality, treating all people the same, Erica and I are having this brunch and we're making Eggs Benedict. Everybody gets Eggs Benedict, whether you like it or not. Whether you like eggs or not, you're all getting the same thing. Now, is everyone going to have the same outcome? Well, probably not. If you're not an Eggs Benedict fan, you're going to be treated as everyone else, but you're not going to have the same satisfaction and enjoyment of that brunch. Now, through the lens of equity, we're going to do something a little different. Erica and I are inviting you over for a fabulous brunch, but here's what we're going to do. Erica and I are going to call each of you and we're going to say, do you have any dietary requests? Do you have any food allergies? Is there a preference that you would like to have when you come to brunch, chez Jacques and Erica, right? And so some of you may say, well, I'm feeling kind of pescatarian. Great, you're going to get wild-caught Alaskan salmon. For some of you are like, yeah, I'm feeling kind of brunchy. I'd like pancakes. Great, you get pancakes. For someone else who's like, well, I don't really eat meat. Great, you get a lovely fruit salad, with all the things. For some of you, maybe, hey, I'm a carnivore and, I don't really want brunch. What I want is a steak. Awesome. You get a grilled porterhouse steak cooked however you like it. And so on and so on. So in this framework of equity, did everyone get the same thing? Was everyone treated the same? No, they didn't. And no, they weren't. But did everyone have the same outcome, which is maximum enjoyment when we come to Erica and Jacques' brunch? Absolutely. And that's what equity does. Equity really seeks to maximize outcomes by removing any barriers that may be preventing someone from moving fluidly through an organization. So that is equity. And the last element of the DEI alphabet, the big three, is inclusion. So inclusion is conduct, it's action. And so what we're looking for in inclusion is, do I have access, equal access to opportunities and resources such that I can move fluidly through the organization from the entry-level position all the way to the C-suite? That's what inclusion is all about. So it's the achievement of a work environment in which all individuals are treated fairly and respectfully. Here's the important part: have equal access to opportunities and resources and can contribute fully to the organization's success. And I love the way my colleague expresses this term. Janet Marie Stovall, a DEI colleague back in Atlanta, Georgia, says, diversity is something you have, inclusion is something you do. Diversity is a fact, inclusion is a choice. Diversity is aspirational, inclusion is actionable. So if we are looking to influence our diversity outcomes, then we get to be present that it's all about inclusion. What are our inclusion strategies? What are the action strategies that we are utilizing, that we are employing so that we can have different diversity outcomes? Okay. Any questions there about diversity, about equity, about inclusion? And I know, Shari, now that I've talked myself into this scenario, I'm getting pretty hungry myself. So we're going to go through a couple more terms. I want to do a time check, Erica.
Yeah, we're doing good on time. It's 10:37. I know we're going to break in about 10 minutes or so.
Right. I'm wondering if we could also, if we could take our first breakout session now.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
So what we'd like to do, having shared these definitions with you of the big three terms in DEI: diversity being the sum total of humanity, equity looking at outcomes and the removal of barriers to promote maximum outcomes for all our team members, and inclusion being an action strategy. We wanted to send you into breakouts, and we wanted you folks to have some conversations for 7 minutes about these terms. And really, now that you have a deeper understanding of the comprehensive meaning of diversity, of equity, and of inclusion, Eric and I want to know, will your conversations and will your actions around the promotion of DEI, will your actions and will your words change? And if so, how will they change? Recognizing that diversity means all of us, that equity is all about the removal of barriers to promote maximum outcome, and that inclusion is an action strategy. We'd love for you to have some dialogue with yourself of how these definitions are landing. Are you aligned with these definitional terms? And with this new awareness for some of you, how might our conversations change? How might our actions change around how we address these terms, how we utilize these terms in our respective agencies? What might we do differently with an awareness of these definitional terms?
Perfect. So Jacques, I'm going to create the breakout rooms, and I can at any time. If you have some specifics, you want to drop them into the chat before they get assigned, just so they have those to-dos. And then we can also drop in a reminder note to all of the breakout room attendees once they're in their rooms. So maybe just 2 prompts for them to remember what they're covering in the breakout rooms, and we'll go ahead and assign them in the next.
Absolutely. So we'll do that. So what I'll do, I will, as you're creating the groups, I'll put the prompt in that that chat.
Perfect. Sounds good.
Right. And so the chat, the prompt purely and simply is, now that we are aware of the updated definitions of DEI, will our conversations and actions change? And if so, how? And we'd love to see what you create. And again, you'll have 7 minutes for this discussion. Erica, I'm thinking once we come back, let's go ahead and take our break, and then let's have some discussion afterwards.
Sounds good. Creating breakout rooms right now.
All right, folks.
You should be seeing an opportunity to join. If anybody has any challenges, we'll be here to help you out.
So you were in your breakout sessions. We went over 3 of 3 terms. We'll be going over a lot more. We wanted you to have some conversations about, hey, given our new levels of awareness and the meanings of diversity, that if diversity is inclusive of all humans, equity is about the removal of barriers to create maximum outcomes for all, inclusion is action. Is this a new level of awareness? Is this going to modify our conversations, modify our actions? And if so, how? We wanted you to have some candid conversations with other folks like yourselves. We would love to hear some examples of or some feedback of your conversations and what you discussed in your sessions. Did you think that these new definitional terms were going to prompt you to do things differently? I realize that we're just getting started in this language conversation, but just wanted to get some feedback from an early from an early phase. So if you could be so kind as to unmute yourselves or drop some comments in the chat to give Erica and I some feedback about how you experienced the breakout and the conversations that you had therein.
And I'll also add that I know that, over the last couple of months, we've been able to normalize some of these discussions, right? You've heard some of these words, and I know that if not even for you thinking about your agencies, how they're utilized there too. State Nancy, I see your hand up, and hopefully you're able to unmute.
Hello, everyone. Nancy McPusau-Burke. I use she, her pronouns. And that's actually one of the things we talked about in my small group is honoring people by their gender identity and making sure to promote a culture of respect by not misgendering folks and having grace around that. And I love the example you shared earlier about dietary needs, planning a gathering. And it reminded me of an event where someone was trying to bring two groups of people together. One was a Muslim group and the other one was just Jewish group. And the organizer had ordered pepperoni pizza and did not understand why that was problematic.
Right.
It kind of reminded me of know your audience, know your audience. And then again, what you said is you want to survey people about their dietary needs, what they might be allergic to, what they can't have. And then another example was having closed caption as an option, or for people who are watching a video or looking at a slide deck, that they have the closed caption option there. And then also with the recordings, it's always nice to have that, looking back, even for folks who are not who don't have hearing loss. It's always good to reinforce the message. So I'm hearing people talk, but I'm also seeing the language, which also helps me sort of retain the information.
Thank you so much for that share, Nancy. I appreciate it. Great feedback. And what your words really spoke to, and everyone in your group and all the groups, I'm sure, is really how to maximize engagement, right? So just honoring humans where they are in the gender space, where they are in terms of abilities. Again, I really love the closed caption feature. And there are a lot of times when I'm watching Netflix with the kids that this 58-year-old baby boomer needs the closed caption because I need to see the word, because I'm not understanding all the dialogue. And abilities are a social construct. Race, we know, is a social construct. Gender is a social construct. And if we're coming from that perspective, let me honor those in my team, in my organization, in my community, and we're coming with empathy and understanding, that impacts our ways of being. So I think you beautifully captured that, Nancy. Thank you so much for that share, and kudos to you and your team. Is there one other person who would love to share? And I do see that there was a comment in the chat. It was Stacy. Stacy said, I really enjoyed the breakout. It made it more active and real, not just sitting in a class. I love what Deidre said, and thank you, Deidre. We talked about how equity versus equality ties back to fairness. That's a really good observation. Susanna, I see that your hand is raised. Would love to take a share from you as well.
Yeah, we've talked quite a bit about just, a number of things about having to, appreciating having these definitions. And then Rita actually said that she would like to carry it around in a 3x5 card with her, to always have it available to remind herself and to be able to include it in conversations. And that led to a discussion, well, we should have several copies available so that we can share that with people and just say, here you go, here's a great definition, here's an up-to-date one. And so because there's so much often confusion, and if people don't know more about it, then they feel like they're judged. So they might shut down, and that stops conversations around it. And the whole point is to begin to have conversations about it and normalize it, and not have it be this scary topic, but actually have it be part of the everyday culture. So I think we all like that idea in our group.
So Susanna, you're drafted. I'm taking you on the road with me. I'm going to Denver next week. You're coming with me, girl, because I love everything that you said. Again, humans have so much judgment around this, right? And the judgment gets in our way. And you're in luck, Susanna, because I've seen that Erica has already made slides for all of you. So we have all the definitions of all the terms, and we want you to carry them around and use them as a quick resource reference guide, because again, language has the, and what we're going to get into momentarily after our break, that language does have the power to connect when we use it the right way. So Erica, I see that your hand is raised, and I'm also doing a time check.
Yeah, and I am just raising my hand on behalf of somebody that wrote me in the private chat that was just saying about, the conversation related to diversity and inclusion and those words in particular. And the idea that, especially now, so many local agencies are hiring and they're looking at the photo on the screen and they're like, I need to diversify my employee base. And they're thinking about the pictures of the people and making sure that the colors look right. But inclusion is a very different conversation. And I think the person in the chat was kind of making those comments around, yes, we might now have a diverse workforce, but if they're not feeling included, and if we're not thinking about including them in important conversations and bringing them to the table and bringing ideas and perspectives to the table, it's not the same thing. And so really making something a little bit more functional as it relates to the inclusion piece and how that ties to what so many of us are dealing with right now as we're going through changes in our workforce and thinking about changing the color and maybe the visual of what our employee base looks like, but really thinking about how to make that real.
Exactly. And Erica, I know you and I have had, this is work that we do, and we've had these conversations. And we also know that our local government partners are really challenged, because it seems like they're being hit from all sides. And we're like, okay, I'm going back to the photo op. I need to change the photo op. And what we're going to say, in the words of John Wooden, famous UCLA basketball coach, be quick, but don't hurry. And really make that change happen from the inside out, because that change is more organic, it's more sustainable, it's longer lasting, as opposed to doing window. As an HR guy, I'm always going to tell you, hire the best person for the job. If the person is green, blue, polka dots, hire the best human for the job. Now, there are ways that we can maximize and enhance our pools so that we get diversity, the full spectrum of diversity in those pools, but we always want to hire the best person for the job, because that creates another narrative for us, right? And so I'm looking forward to continued conversations, not just with you and I know, but I'm going to be doing a presentation at the general managers meeting for CASD, where we get to have these conversations to really give some practical tools to support local agencies on doing well and doing good at the same time. You always want to hire the best person. And are there ways that we can maximize our pools to make them more diverse through multiple lenses? Absolutely. And we always want to hire the best person for the job. Yeah. So doing a time check, why don't we go ahead and take, Erica, would this be a good time for us to take our 5-minute break?
5 minutes.
5
yes,
minutes?
That's perfect. Come back at 11:05. We will be here, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed.
All right. See you, folks.
If you're within earshot, we're going to get started in just a few moments, seconds actually. All right, hopefully you can still hear us and you're back at your desk. Please go ahead and return to us so we can finish up the second half of this language of cultural intelligence training.
Thank you very much, Eric, and welcome back, everyone. We hope you had a time for wonderful self-care, and let's continue with our journey. So the next couple terms we're going to be talking about are social construct terms. Social construct, as we are aware, is a wonderful, fancy academic word for saying humans made it up. So race is our first social construct term. And so we learned in our foundational course that there is only one race, Homo sapiens, the human race. We also learned in our foundational course that we are 99% genetically identical. So everybody wave to our newfound cousins who are in our virtual classroom space. So again, race is inclusive of all humans. Race is an agnostic term. So it's neutral. It is inclusive of white people and people of color, and it's not a proxy for other diversity characteristics. Like diversity is inclusive of all humans, race is inclusive of all humans. Ethnicity is a different terminology. So this term, where race is a social construct, right? And we know that humans have attached powerful meaning to race over the last 400 to 500 years, even though for the last 70,000 years of human existence, humans have described themselves and categorized other humans by a myriad of characteristics, right? It's only been within the last 400 to 500 years that humans have decided to categorize humans based solely on skin pigmentation. That is a modern phenomenon. Now, ethnicity, on the other hand, is a more anthropologically accurate term than race. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of ethnic groups all across the country and all across the world. And ethnicity is a community or population made up of people who share a common cultural background or descent. So while my race may be African American, my ethnicity is both Scottish, Irish, and Creole Catholic, Lithuanian Jewish, Puerto Rican Catholic, Turkish Christian, Serbian Muslim. Those are ethnic. Celtic is an ethnic group, Irish ethnic group, Filipino ethnic group. And that's a more anthropologically accurate way of describing humans, because race is, again, because race is so fluid, because it is a social construct, there is no scientific definition of race other than Homo sapiens, because there's only one race. But with ethnicities, there are thousands and thousands of different categories that are based in ethnic culture. And so, again, a more anthropologically accurate way of describing humans. There's some other terms that relate to ethnicity, and these are academic terms. So POC, people of color. BIPOC is a new term that we see now, which is Black, Indigenous people of color, and the term Latinx, a person of Latin American origin or descent. Now, recognize that these terms are academic terms. They are accurate in the academic sense. These are not terms that the groups themselves have developed. So Black people did not get together and vote and decide, oh, well, our new terminology is going to be BIPOC. That's not a thing. These are academic constructs. These are social constructs. And so for purposes of what we do in the government space, grant writing, as we're looking at some diversity metrics, as we're looking at other outcomes, we may utilize these terms, but let's recognize that just because we utilize them in the academic sense or in a programmatic sense or in a grant writing sense, that's not to say that the individual groups themselves have assigned these terms to them. And most recently, there's been quite a bit of pushback by certain members of the Hispanic Latino communities about the term Latinx, because it is an academic term and not necessarily a term that comes from the group itself.
Yeah, and I would add to that too a little bit, Jacques, on same thing with BIPOC. I've even
Yes.
noticed, in addition to the Latinx kind of controversy around whether you use it or don't, and who does and who defined it, even with BIPOC, there are certainly African Americans that are like, just call me Black. And I don't want to be lumped in. It's diminishing to the Black population to be categorized under BIPOC when you're adding on other acronyms, other initials. Black and African American, right?
Exactly.
So there's certainly nuanced ways to think about
Right.
this specific terms, and when you use those in the community in particular, know the sensitivity of the audience you might be engaging with.
Exactly, and I think the takeaway there, and you raise a good point, and so thank you for that, Erica. The takeaway, folks, is that especially when we're talking about these academic terms, even if we use them in the sense of grant writing or developing DEI metrics, let's be sensitive to the agency of the different groups that we're dealing with in terms of how does the group itself prefer to be identified. And I think that's, again, all about engagement, right? So we're honoring what is that lived experience? What are the living words that the group would like to be identified? So excellent awareness there. And then here's another term that has taken on a new and different meaning. Now, full disclosure, 24 years ago, I started as a minority recruiter in the public education space. So I was charged with doing a couple things. Number one, identifying, recruiting, and hiring bilingual teachers in Spanish, Russian, and Hmong. And the second charge I had was to recruit and hire African-American male teachers in math, in science, and in special education. Now, as the world progressed and the world evolved, certainly as we began to be more of a global village, by the end of the Cold War, and looking at the fact that the world is a global village at the commencement of the 21st century, thought leaders in the DEI space took another look at the term minority. Because when you recognize that some 60% of the world's population lives on the continent of Asia, right? When we say Asian, we mean the Asian land mass. Right? If we're looking at almost 19% of the world's population is Chinese. If we look at 17% of the world's population is located on the continent of Africa. And then if you look at the population of the Asian continent and the African continent is almost 70% of the world's population. Then for thought leaders, especially as how we identified groups that we work with here in the United States, calling someone who is of African descent or who is of Asian descent a minority is kind of an oxymoron. And again, while they may be a statistical minority in a certain segment or community, if we look at the global picture, they are clearly not a mathematical minority. And so for me as an educator, the journey that I evolved, I decided to no longer call students of color minority students. Now, might you be from underserved communities? Yes, that is factually accurate. Might you be from historically disadvantaged communities? Yes, that may be historically accurate. May you be from underrepresented groups, historically underrepresented groups? Yes, that is factual and accurate. But the term minority, I found for me to be minusculing, to be minimizing. So I no longer use the term. I am not telling you not to use the term. I only want to make you aware that these are the conversations that are going on now in the DEI space as to how can we utilize language to create maximum engagement with other humans, and how recognizing that minority may not speak into that engagement. Erica, yes.
Hi, I just want to add one thing along the lines of these, because I think you're also speaking to what some of these local government leaders are probably addressing with some of their external relations too. So we have seen a lot of organizations that are working with the state and other federal organizations on funding around disadvantaged communities. And so I'm not sure if we're going to get to this specifically, but as you think about the terminology related to minorities and related to some of these other descriptors of culture and race, know that even the DAC term, the disadvantaged communities term, is getting a little bit of pushback, because disadvantaged community historically underrepresented is maybe a little bit more appropriate, given that there's some systemic challenges related to funding, related to other things in the government structures that have limited the capacity of some communities and of some cultures to advance. And so the idea that they are hard to serve, underserved, under-resourced, those words are a little bit becoming a lot more prevalent because of that. And it's less about them not being, they're hard to reach, or is it, or disengaged. Those terms are not being received as well by the community, because many times they haven't been reached out to, haven't been invested in. And so really understanding that nuance when you start to kind of segment your populations and really think about increasing your engagement with them as a local government, know the sensitivity around some of those language and those descriptions for your community members.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the goal then is becomes, Erica, we get to presence our emotional intelligence tools and our cultural intelligence tools on a daily basis, because we're always doing that self-awareness check, that situational awareness to check to say, is there a new level of elevation here? Can I show up powerfully through language in a more effective way? Again, what's the goal, folks? Engagement. If I'm creating that maximum engagement, are there other words that I can offer in the space to truly create that connection? So excellent point, Erica. Very, very excellent point. So another social construct term, gender. Sex is biological, but gender is a social construct term and has always been for the last 70,000 years that humans have been the dominant species on the planet. So gender is a socially constructed norms, behaviors, roles associated with being woman, man, girl, boy, and that's inclusive of non-binary individuals. So gender is not biological. Gender is inclusive of non-binary individuals. And when we have a situation where our gender corresponds to birth sex, that is called cisgender. Orientation, sexual orientation, really simple definition. A person's identity in relation to the gender or genders to which they are sexually attracted to. In the post-2020 world, and again in the 21st century, we no longer use terms like sexual preference or lifestyle or choice, because again, it minimizes that orientation. It is not effective language through the lens of emotional intelligence or cultural intelligence. This is not a part of the culture wars. Orientation clearly and simply is, what is the gender or genders to which you're sexually attracted to? And humans can be attracted to more than one gender or gender expressions.
Hey, Jacques, I have a question for you. Just because I'm getting some questions in the chat, and I want to make sure that I want to respond to them and/or have you respond to them accurately.
Okay.
Do you want us to take those? Tell us when's a good time to take some questions on this.
Let's take them now. I love them like they come. Yeah.
So I've got a question in here, and hopefully, Amy, I don't know if you meant to send it just to me, but you did. And I think that this is the best practice to engage individuals and their preferences versus terms in a more general way. So what is the best practice to engage individuals and their preferences versus using terms in a more general way? And Mamie, if you want to say that more declaratively, verbally, feel free to unmute yourself and explain kind of exactly what you were thinking there.
Okay. And so I can give you an answer. And Amy, if you would like to respond after I give the answer, I'm fine. Or if you'd like to. So I purely and simply, it's I think the best practice is to do it in the onboarding process. It's just perfunctory. As you're filling out, all of your human resources documents, and how would you like to be referred? How would you like to be referred? Again, there are, my name is Jacques, and my name has been butchered ever since I started kindergarten. Jacques, Jacques, Jake, Josh. And again, the pronouns for me, because I've gotten letters, you can imagine during my lifetime, dear Mrs. Whitfield. And my name is not Jackie, it's Jacques. And so me responding to that question is not a social justice response. It's just a human response. My name is Jacques. You can call me Jacques. My pronouns are he, him, his. And I think that is that should be handled at the lowest possible level. It should be perfunctory. It should be, this is what we do to all humans in our organization, because we're coming from a space where we value you as an individual. As an individual, you belong. And so how do you want to be referred?
Yeah, and then I would ask too, Jock, would you expand that externally as well? So certainly from an internal perspective, that makes total sense at the onboarding, new team member starting off. I think it's probably appropriate at the community level too, as you're exploring and engaging with community stakeholders at the introduction stage. You ask the question about their preferences for identification, their preferences for even those descriptors that we were talking about, so that you don't step into a landmine and
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And again, Erica, if everyone remembers, the goal here is engagement. The key to engagement is connection. It's meeting people where they are. And how do I know where you are if I haven't asked you? And I think just that element of emotional humility, that empathy, compassion, that cultural humility is like, I don't know what I don't know. So the only way I'm going to know is to ask. And so I think if that becomes not in weird, but it just becomes regular. This is just part of my modus operandi of how I engage with every human internally. And as you aptly pointed out, externally, of course, externally, of course.
Angela's got a question in the chat about the difference between cultural intelligence and cultural competency.
Cultural competency is a subset of cultural intelligence. Cultural competency was the 1.0 version of cultural intelligence. Cultural intelligence is probably the 3.0 version of cultural competency. So cultural intelligence, again, is how humans connect, communicate, collaborate with other humans. Cultural competency is a part of that intelligence framework. So the total universe is cultural intelligence. And that's a great question. Thank you for that. Are there other questions in the chat that I need to address?
I don't see any in the chat. Last chance for questions for Jacques before we move on. Oh.
Okay. And thank you for that. Got the feedback. Okay, Angela. All right. So again, unconscious bias. Really simple definition, folks. Unintended people preferences. You're not a bad person if you have unconscious bias, because guess what? All human beings for the last 70,000 years have operated with unconscious bias or implicit bias. It's unintended people preferences, right? Formed by a myriad of circumstances. And these people preferences act as a social filter in which we make automatic judgments around the people, about the people around us. All humans have it. All humans are going to have it. Relax, that we will never eliminate unconscious bias. There are ways to neutralize it. And the first step to neutralizing it is acknowledging it. Now, the behavior that comes from unconscious bias are called micro behaviors. Now, micro behaviors in and of themselves, agnostic, they can be positive or negative. I will tell you, most micro behaviors are negative. Those are microaggressions. And again, when we have our conversation about unconscious bias, we plan to do a deeper dive on this. Allyship. Allyship is conversations we've been having in the nonprofit space. These conversations around allyship are newer in the government space. And again, the whole goal is all about engagement. So this is the active practice of emphasizing social justice, inclusion, and human rights by members of an in-group to advance the interest of an oppressed or marginalized out-group. And again, the key is engagement. Prejudice, like unconscious bias, mindset. Once upon a time in the 60s and 70s, in my little mind, I divided humans into nice people and prejudiced people. That definition, outdated. Prejudice today, a mindset, just like unconscious bias. The mindset is when we prejudge another person based on the social group or groups to which they belong. They are attitudes and then projected on an entire group based on little or no experience. And again, all humans have some form of prejudice. You're not a bad person, you're just a human person. Welcome to the human race. Discrimination is the conduct that arises from a prejudiced mindset. And again, the goal is that we don't want the conduct to come out of this mindset. Racism and all of the isms, all of the obias. So racism, sexism, ageism, ableism, those are now in the post-2020 framework, institutional structures of oppression. So racism, institutional structure of oppression based on race or color. Sexism, institutional structure of oppression based on sex or gender. Ageism, institutional structure of oppression based on age. Ableism, institutional structure of oppression based on abilities. Early in the 20th century, late 20th century, right on up to the 21st century, we were focused on individual conduct. Now we are concerned, of course, we're always looking at individual conduct, but more importantly, we are looking at the systems that really impact, that really add fuel to that individual conduct. So we're looking at systems and the individual conduct. And so much of, for many of us who were acculturated in the United States, we wanted to be the good person. I'm a good person, I'm polite. In the 21st century, we recognize, again, what we say in the transformational space, yesterday's ceiling is today's floor. So where we want people to be good people, the goal now is, are you an anti-racist? Are you an anti-sexist? Are you an anti-Islamophobe? Are you an anti-xenophobe? Like, what are we affirmatively doing so that we are creating these inclusion strategies to make people have a greater sense of belonging? So not really just focusing exclusively on individual conduct, but really looking at the totality of the situation of how we can be more effective humans in the space of engagement, which brings us to our closing thought of the day. Words can inspire and words can destroy. Choose yours well. We'll now open up the opportunity for questions and feedback. I did want to go over the reading list that we have, Erica. We have a pretty comprehensive reading list this time. We have, again, The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz, Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man by Emmanuel Aco, Growth Mindset by Dr. Carol Dweck, The 5-Second Rule by Mel Robbins, Reconstructing the Gospel by Jonathan Wilson Hargrove, Daring Greatly by Brené Brown, and A Promised Land by President Barack Obama.
Excellent. Before we get to the questions, start thinking about them now. Begin to drop them into the chat. We will open it up live. I just want to give you a couple of very, very quick updates. This is session 2 of our 4-part series, and we are going to be opening registration for session 3 very soon. And that topic is managing conflict through the lens of cultural intelligence. The date is set for June 29th. And as this one was, it's free to participate. You will need to register, and we are limiting the space to 50 people. So we are grateful grateful to you all for certainly joining us on this one, but we hope that you'll be able to join us or refer a friend to the next one as well. We do like to keep this limited to local government staff and officials only, and so we are curating our content for you all and making sure that this is really tailored to the audience that we know are from cities, counties, and special districts. Next slide. Another thing you should know is that we are so committed at ILG to making sure that you have some resources, some training, and some of the content that you need to really do your jobs well as you're navigating the complexity of equity, of cultural intelligence, of some of the diversity and belonging conversations. And so we have 2 other webinars in the next couple of weeks that you might enjoy that really pair nicely with this one. We're working with the Braver Angels team on Bridging Divide series. That next session for that one will be Depolarizing Within, and that's going to be on Wednesday, June 8th. And next week, we're actually having a great conversation about civility in local government. How do we kind of bring back the conversations around really, really meaningful policy dialogue that's both respectful and impactful, that's inclusive, that really aligns with equity, but also maintains some of the decorum that might be necessary for us to do our jobs and feel safe doing it. So we're going to have a really good conversation about strategies to improve civil discourse in public meetings. And we hope you'll join us on Thursday, June 2nd for that webinar as well. Next slide. You should know how to reach us. If you don't, please do join our Facebook, Twitter, our LinkedIn pages and follow us. And then you can also join our newsletter if you're not already attached to that. That's the best way to know when registration opens for this webinar in particular, because it is limited in scope and size. The other webinars we do are open to all and recorded and shared broadly, but we definitely want to make sure those with the smaller registrations, those on our lists and on our social feeds, get the first updates about when those registrations open. Next slide. So we are open for questions now. If you had any additional ones related to some of the language, some of the things that maybe you didn't quite hit right, or you have questions about how to apply, or even terms that maybe we didn't cover, please feel free to ask those now or follow up with us via email later. Our contact information is on the screen, and I will go ahead and bring us back to gallery view and give you a chance to chat with us or raise your hands or drop into the chat your questions so that we can all see each other. All right, so a couple questions. We definitely do plan to make today's slides and the recording available to everyone, and we'll send that out to you all, and it'll be on our website. So if you missed the email, it'll be on our website within a couple of days, the slides and the reading list and the recording. And then I see Judy's got a question, Jacques. I don't know if you can see that one.
Yes, I do see that question. This is an awesome question, Judy. So Judy says, how can we create a work environment where being anti-racist is more appropriate than being polite? This is, so this really speaks to what is the journey of transformation that our organizations get to grow through. This is really if an organization wants to take an enterprise approach into DEI, recognizing that this is, leadership and transformational growth and development. It is longitudinal in nature. It really requires us to infuse these core concepts into every functional unit of who we are. And for many of us as local government organizations, we're already committed to the public service, right? We're already have that as our tenet, but then being more intentional, and how are we creating these not only professional development opportunities, but there must be a corresponding opportunity to kind of practice what we're learning in the education and learning space, right? So are we creating those opportunities for lunch and learns? Are we, and really ultimately, this requires a recognition of what is the power dynamic of our organizations, and is the power dynamic a shared power situation, and do we get to recalibrate that power dynamic such that more people have the ability to tap into and be a part of those conversations. Now, we know that some organizations can be very top-down, very seemingly bureaucratic, where folks don't have an opportunity for feedback and input. And we can be effective local governments, and we can shift and recalibrate that power dynamic so more folks feel I'm invested in the organization. I belong to this organization. It's not so much a matter of fitting in or belonging. So really doing that transformational work that goes from being polite, which is external, which is a good external response, but we want it to come from within. Those are longer conversations, those are longer ways of being. And really, in order to be effective in those spaces, those are longer investment, professional development opportunities and strategies. And are there local government organizations in California who are doing that? Absolutely. We're partners with some of them. And again, it's not about judgment. It's not even about, oh my God, I'm feeling some type of way, because we're not there yet. We are all on different parts of the journey. And one of the most self-aware conversations when I met with the senior leadership team, and they said, hey, Jacques, you know what? We're not there yet. We're still trying to get what the definitions mean. And we're like, awesome, we'll meet you where you are. And I think that's the key on recognizing that this is a journey, that this is not episodic. It's not going to be over in 5 trainings or 10 trainings, that this is a way of being that we get to shift into. Love that question.
And I want to add to that. I loved your answer, Jacques. And I just want to acknowledge for Judy that a lot of organizations have people at all different levels. So the organization might be at a certain level, but individuals within it might be at different places in that trajectory. And one thing that we're seeing is that, you've been, interested in this discussion, and it's a very foundational kind of basic training on some of the key terms and some of the key language. I guarantee you that some of those people that you're maybe referring to probably haven't had that level of training, haven't gotten to be exposed to these terms, don't understand how they might be applying language that is racist or feels offensive to some. And so if they know better, they might be able to do better. So how do you build the education and training culture within your organization? How do you make sure that people are aware of their input and their actions and how that's affecting the team? And certainly resources like ILG and certainly resources like others can be available to you all to kind of help you navigate that, because you're only as good as the people on the team, and you're only as effective as those that understand what they're doing. So helping them understand that is key, and certainly getting the support of your leadership to have these conversations candidly is definitely a good start.
Erica, may I add something else?
Yeah.
And it's important to have all voices represented, including voices who may not be aligned with where you are. Because again, if the goal is maximum engagement of every single human within my organization, then that means as a DEI champion, I get to practice what I preach. I'm not going to go turn around and exclude the people who may have excluded me in the past, or I'm going to marginalize. So that tit for tat doesn't work. That's why the work is meaningful, and it's not easy, because bringing folks to the table, especially an individual or a voice that is not aligned, and in holding space for that individual to say, yeah, I recognize that you and I are not in agreement, we're not aligned here, and your opinion, your voice matters, that we get to model, this is what inclusion looks like. And again, that's why this journey is transformational. That's why a transactional approach is just not enough. It's just not effective. So Rita, I love what you said in the chat. Rita says, my homework assignment for myself, find a person to engage with on terms and how they feel to both of us, and how they fit where we work and with the work that we're doing. Kind of, hey, I attended a great webinar, and so I love that. Awesome. I'd love to see what you create. Please send me an email and let me know how that conversation, how that way of being turned out.
And I think too, these conversations are a lot better when they happen in person, face to face, or amongst individuals. Certainly, it's one thing to see people on social media kind of rant against each other and rail against each other, but when you're in the same room, or when you're engaged one-on-one with one another, especially somebody that thinks a little differently than you, or maybe somebody you've had a challenge with, I think it hits differently. It feels different when you're trying to build a rapport with somebody, you're trying to build trust, you're trying not to ruin a relationship, even a professional one, right? So I do think that how you come to the table, how you engage, and the intent with which you come to that table is really, really important. And you have some power to make those
You said
impacts.
something really powerful there, Eric, and I want to underscore it. When we're having these conversations, folks, and this goes back to a crucial conversations framework. If you read the book or taking a training, I know we're going to be talking about crucial conversations a little later. But am I communicating for awareness and understanding, or am I communicating for advocacy? Most humans, when we're communicating, and we love humans, right? We love us so much, but we're communicating for advocacy. We're communicating because I'm right and I'm telling you how to be. So you get to think the way I think. I'm going to convince you, I'm going to debate you until you agree with me. That is not what these conversations are about. When you're communicating for awareness or understanding or connection, we are literally, we are emotionally, we are energetically holding space for those other individuals. My goal is not to convince, my goal is to connect and to learn where you're coming from. And to do that in alignment, which means without judgment. That's the goal. And so we could, if we learn how to do that effectively, Erica and colleagues, we could have safer conversations in the workplace. The reason our conversations go so squirrely is because all of us is the expert, and we're going to have that conversation with that person, meaning I'm going to convince you that I'm right and you're wrong, and I'm not going to stop until you agree with me. That's how we've approached vaccines. That's how we've approached masks. That's how we approach, remote work. That's how we approach all of these topics, as opposed to holding space, recognizing there are multiple perspectives, and just engaging, having conversations to connect.
Yeah, I want to add one more shameless plug for our Bridging Divide series. So what's different about that series is they are workshops where you are workshopping the actual habits and the necessary techniques to do exactly what Jacques just talked about. It is literally the script you need to be more of an active listener, to listen to understand instead of listen to respond. You're going to learn how to take these very challenging issues that we all deal with in local government, and then how you respond to those in a way that is actually authentic, in a way that is building trust, in a way that is hearing the other person. And it's a very different than our traditional webinars. They're 2-hour engagement workshop sessions where you are practicing the skills. And so if that is of interest, we encourage you to join us. There's a couple of those sessions, and the next one is really about how to get those internal things figured out, depolarizing within. So we hope you'll join. And certainly the whole Leading Local series this year is all about these topics and figuring out how to do it in real time at your government agencies.
That's awesome. I think I want to attend that training.
Join that one, Jacques. Come on in. You're welcome.
Awesome.
Any other questions for our fearless leader, Jacques, today? Wonderful. I don't see any, Jacques.
Okay. Well, I just, again, on behalf of everyone at Impact Foundry and at CPSHR, I want to thank you. I want to thank you for creating such a welcoming space for me to have this conversation with each of you. I'm excited when you get the slides. I'm excited to see how you get to use them and how you get to incorporate the new language and new ways of being. And I just want to acknowledge all of you for the amazing work that you do, and looking forward to our conversation next month, Erica.
Yes, next month's going to be amazing. So we're going to Managing Difficult Conversations is coming next. So it's all progressive, as you can tell. We're basing this on the foundation of this cultural intelligence, and getting to the next step is going to be big for all of you. I want to thank you guys so much for spending your time with us, and we're so looking forward to seeing you next month for our next session.
I see there is a raised hand. Deidre has her hand raised.
Oh, Deidre, hello.
Hello, so sorry. I couldn't get my reaction buttons to come up and raise my hand, and I was like, oh, they're wrapping up. Sorry. But I just, expanding on what we were talking about in the breakout group with my group, on how to help when talking with others and they perceive something to be unfair because it is unequal. are there just tips on how to have those conversations because I feel like you did it really well, and now I can't like recreate that conversation in my mind, but I just feel like to me, that was a real eye opener and a challenge that we face all the time, where people people perceive to be fair, is potentially just because of what's going on in that situational moment. It's this transactional thing that is feeling unfair because it's unequal. But, yeah, just if there's tips, or if one of those reading suggestions is something that would help me with those conversations. Because I think for me, this issue of what people perceive to be fair is what gets us stuck a lot of times.
So, Deidre, excellent question. And you're right, because so many folks get hung up on their perception of fairness. Because if you were to take their definition of fairness and broaden it, they would themselves see that the definition is not accurate, is not consistently applied across the board. Now, but let me default to what I know. I still believe that is an advocacy conversation, because it's me convincing you're seeing it wrongly. Let me show you this. I think the excellent examples on fairness, for me, the best example of fairness is, again, that equity conversation, focus on outcomes, and the example I gave of the classroom teacher. Or I'll tell you this, parenthood. I have 4 children. Do I treat them the same? No. Do I love them? Of course I do. And each of them requires, Ashley, Erica knows, my daughter, me, add water and stir. Just give Ashley the ropes and the reins. She's off to the races. My middle child, Chase, lot more hand holding. I'm the helicopter parent. Josh, ever since he popped out, I have been chasing him for 22 years, so he is the Google definition of self-motivated, right? Because he's going to do what he's going to do. And we love our children, and we would never say, oh, well, that's not fair, that because Ashley requires no support here and Chase requires more support, I'm going to give Chase support. And to be fair, let me give Ashley something she doesn't even need, right? So if we use practical examples, let's break it down. Let's demystify it. In the parental space, for me as a classroom teacher, recognizing, look, I have 30 students. They're all at different levels and different abilities. I have one goal. The outcome, I want them all to get to the 8th grade in 1 year. They're going to require different levels of intervention in the academic space. We call that differentiated instruction. Is it fair? Of course, because the outcome is I'm going to give you what you need to be successful. And let's recognize that people need different things. Yes, Sherry, I see your hand is raised.
Sorry, it took me a second to unmute. So kind of along the same lines, can I give a different example and maybe you can help through this?
Okay.
So our planning division is able to work a hybrid schedule, 50% at home, 50% at work. And we have counter techs that are very frustrated by this because they can't. And they feel that it is unfair. So I'm trying to wrap in my brain how to deal with that, because we have different jobs in that we're able to be successful at home, and because our management hasn't created a space for them to be able to work remotely, they can't. So how does that play into fairness or equity, or how do you address those conversations?
So great example, great question. I would invite the organization, Sherry, to perform the factual analysis of, and again, this is an HR conversation. This is not what leadership looks like. This is agnostic HR. And this is recognizing there are some job functions in the 21st century that must be performed on site. There are other job functions in the 21st century that can be performed off-site. Now, what's the agnostic real answer in XYZ organization of the positions that can be performed on-site and off-site. And I say the agnostic real-world definition because then there's the leadership framework and leadership. And again, I have these conversations all across the country. And it goes a little something like this. I'm meeting with the city manager, county exec, leadership team, and they say, well, you know, we believe that, don't you love my little authoritative voice? Well, we believe that as management, we need to be visible to our teams. That is a preference, that is not a fact. Let's be honest and say it's my preference. Because in the fairness conversation, trust and believe, our team members already know what can be done virtually and what can be done on site. We lose credibility when we don't answer the question honestly. So the conversation, yeah, and so I spend a lot of time. Last year, Erica knows, I'm bouncing around the country because we were anticipating, hey, one day the pandemic was going to be over. And when the pandemic is over, now that we know what we know, which guess what, folks? There are many jobs that can be performed off-site, regardless of the ex cathedra pronouncement of management and leadership, okay? With all due respect to leaders, love you all, and I'm just going to put that over here. So our teams know the real answer, and we can create engagement if we acknowledge the real answer. Now, you can always say, manager, just notwithstanding that, our management has taken this position, so that you're explaining, yes, I know it is physically possible to do this work off-site, but we have made a determination. Now, when you do that, recognize you are raising a fairness issue. And so to accommodate that, or to recognize that you're knowingly treating this group of people differently, you get to do your math homework. You get to ask yourself the question, why? And are there any considerations that can be made for these folks, since you know, practically speaking, this job can be done anywhere. You just choose to have it done here. Now, conversely, there are positions, if I am a public works street sweeper, that can't be done virtually. The job description, I gotta operate the machine. I'm driving down Main Street. I can't phone that in. That's never going to happen on Zoom. And so we say that. And so the more candid conversation that we have with our teams, again, and where we really missed the mark, Sherry and colleagues, we didn't start having these conversations from an awareness standpoint first. Everybody met with me and met with Erica and met with Regina, my senior leader. And it's like, this is what we want to do, show us how to do it. As opposed to saying, we want to know where our folks are. Once we know where they are, we can now thoughtfully contemplate where we'd like to be. That's the step that a lot of folks missed. And employees, we love our employees, and they keep score. Of course they keep score. So if our words are not in alignment with our actions, or we say something that's factually incorrect, then we lose credibility.
I totally agree. One thing that we're seeing too that's helpful too is for you all to make sure you go back to your organizational core values. So Jacques was talking about the band-aiding or the teacher example, like what do you want to accomplish, right? He wanted to get these students to 8th grade. So that was his ultimate goal. A lot of your local agencies have individual internal and external values that you want to exemplify. Going back to the how do we get to this outcome piece might help you define what equity and equality looks like for you and fairness looks like for you in those specific workplace examples. So when you look at, it looks like Agueda says, our city rotates the front desk team. They do have work that can be done offsite, and they give them the flexibility to rotate so they're not always there all the time. Thinking creatively about how to honor the values of your internal organization or your work group while still understanding the constructs is really helpful. And I think it speaks volumes to people, especially those employees that see that you're trying to meet them where they are and accommodate given what you want to accomplish externally, and how you want to be present for those people that maybe need to walk into the building.
Right. Sherry, can I give one more answer? And this is an answer. And again, and Erica knows this, I'm a transformational coach as well. So I'm always going to give the transformational answer. And so you can experience how you want to experience it. But ultimately, I find that humans are motivated by two things. We're motivated by love or by fear. And so often concern, all the language that my colleagues who are on the business about the fiscal side of the house, I'm on the human side of the house, right? So we get to lead with, and again, both sides are valuable. But from the transformational side, am I motivated by love or am I motivated by, do I believe the best in my teams, or am I fearful? Am I apprehensive? Am I not trusting of my teams? And we can trust and we can also verify. So again, where does that come from? So let's present those emotional intelligence tools, those cultural intelligence tools, that self-awareness piece, that situational awareness piece. Am I reading the room? Am I recognizing where we are? I see that your hand is raised, Agata.
Thank you. I did want to share that there was a lot of work behind all this when the city. So we have a one-stop shop, and we have like front desk, like code enforcement, public utilities, everything that relates to permits that are necessary for, the growth or expansion of our city. That whole team looking at what they can take home and work out of, it did require getting them laptops as well, not just management. So the laptops, the VPN access, the cell phones, there are additional materials that they need, and there are costs related to that. So that's another piece to consider, because VPN access is important. They're able to answer the phone. Everything transfers into cell phones, the work cell phones and things like that. So we have teams, we're able to communicate with them, different things like that that were implemented through COVID. So COVID woke us up to some things. And in a sense, it made people happier in what was happening, because the pandemic caused a lot of grief on families and different things like that. So it brought the morale a little bit higher, because they could stay home and work and also balance family at the same time.
Absolutely. It's all about engagement. And so your example is a beautiful illustration of a couple things. Number one, and I know we shared these statistics before, prior to the pandemic, some 30% of our workforce was experiencing varying degrees of mental wellness issues. And we know that May is Mental Health Awareness Month. As a result of the pandemic, that number increased threefold, which means 90% of the workforce, let me say it again for the people in the virtual back, 90% of the workforce is experiencing varying degrees of mental wellness issues. And if this is an elegant technology solution that communicates to my team, we care about you, we care about your well-being, and we are grateful and appreciative to you continuing to do the people's work. That is that's the win. That's it, folks. That's the winning strategy. And so, and again, I'm pray for me, because I work in the government, the state agency space. And so where the state let everyone be virtual, now the state, the state giveth and the state taketh away. Now the state is saying, whoa, I think we're gonna go back to normal. And folks are like, well, wait a minute. There's a better way to do this. And if the standard response is, well, we need to be, focused on, if you give the elevator speech response, rather than the real world response, it's not going to be effective. Great question. Any other feedback or questions? Or I hope this was helpful for you. Erica, this is always fun. So
I know, it always is so fun. I love these sessions. I can't wait till next month.
I know. Looking forward to it.
All right. Well, you do know where to find us. You know how to reach out. And if you want to, and if you're thinking about some of these things, shoot us a note in advance of the next session or even after this one, just to say, this is what I like. This is what I'd like to be done differently. We're always in continuous improvement mode. And we want to make sure that this content is working for what you need right now. And so our conversation just now about that kind of intersection of workforce and equity, love that. The fairness conversations, they apply so well. We'd love to queue up some topics for you in the future sessions if there's certain things you definitely want to connect on or about. This is really about making your lives easier and getting your jobs done well. So we're going to continue in that vein moving forward. So we hope you will reach out. We hope that you got something out of today. We hope you enjoyed the dialogue and that your cohort is moving along with you to the next round as well. With that, we will say happy Wednesday and have a wonderful rest of your week and a wonderful Memorial Day weekend. And we'll see you next month.
Thanks, everyone.